It's strange how one moment on live television can make an entire country stop breathing. One sentence, one expression, one shift in the air so sharp that anyone watching could feel something was about to break. And it all started with a man who never asked for attention, never chased fame, and never bragged about the battles he fought to get where he stood that morning. His name was Malik Trenford, a 34-year-old black entrepreneur whose success didn't grow from comfort or connections. It grew from nights when the lights were shut off, mornings when the bus never came, afternoons spent fixing broken things because buying new ones wasn't an option. Everything about him carried the weight of a man who built his life piece by piece, with no shortcuts waiting in the corner. 3 sentences in, now I'll introduce myself like you asked. My name is Simmons, and you're watching Chronicles of Black. If you're here right now, make sure you subscribe, because stories like this deserve a voice, and I want to hear your thoughts in the comments. Tell me what you would have done in Malik's place. Your voice matters here. The morning Malik stepped into the studio, he had no idea the interview would turn into something the world wouldn't forget. He arrived expecting to talk about the invention he'd poured years of his life into, a device meant to bring safer, smarter infrastructure to neighborhoods the city never funded, schools overlooked, streets ignored, blocks where promise lived, but opportunity didn't. That was why he built it, to protect people who rarely felt protected. But from the second he walked through the door, he felt something tighten in his chest. The kind of tension you feel when someone smiles at you with their mouth but not their eyes. A producer greeted him, called him Malik instead of Malik, and when Malik gently corrected him, the man laughed and said, close enough. The second time, it didn't sound like a mistake. The third time, it felt intentional. Malik didn't snap. He never snapped. He stored the feeling deep inside, the same way he'd learned to store 100 tiny cuts that came from being told his name was too much, too different, or too hard to say. He swallowed it, the way so many black men do just to get through the day, and reminded himself why he was there. Inside the studio, the lights were bright enough to blur everything else, but not bright enough to hide the truth sitting across from him. Clay Morrison, America's favorite morning show host. A man with perfect hair, perfect teeth, and a voice that could convince viewers to trust him, even when they shouldn't. Clay smiled when he shook Malik's hand, but behind that smile was something else. Something Malik had seen before in boardrooms, meetings, and conferences. A mix of doubt and homework done incorrectly. Just relax, Clay said as they sat down. We'll make this fun. Malik forced a polite smile. Fun wasn't the word he'd use for the way Clay's eyes scanned him, as if checking whether a man like him really belonged in a room like this. The camera light turned red. They were live. Clay opened with a question that sounded harmless at first, but something about the tone left a sting. He asked Malik where he really grew up. He asked if his kind of neighborhood had influenced his invention. He asked if he ever imagined himself making it out. None of these questions were phrased as insults, but they all tasted like the same old story, wrapped in new paper. Malik answered each one with patience, explaining his mother's sacrifices, the long nights he spent repairing electronics, the way he turned survival into skill. The audience at home heard the words. Clay didn't. He heard what he wanted to hear. Then came the moment when the mask started slipping. Clay leaned back in his chair, crossed his legs, and tilted his head like he was examining something fragile. He smiled that polished smile and said, "It's impressive, Malik. Your background doesn't normally produce tech founders." There was a silence so heavy you could feel it press against your ribs. Malik didn't blink, didn't flinch, didn't look away. But behind his calm expression was the fire of a man who'd heard that same message his entire life, just spoken with different words. You don't belong here. You're the exception, not the rule. People like you aren't expected to rise this high. Clay didn't notice the shift in the room. He didn't notice the producer behind the camera freeze for half a second. He didn't notice the way Malik inhaled slowly, as if steadying his entire history inside one breath. Malik answered politely, but his voice carried a firmness that wasn't there before. He said, "People from where I'm from produce a lot more than the world bothers to see." Clay pretended to laugh, but the laugh didn't land. He glanced at his notes, flipped a card, and something in his eyes changed. The softness vanished, the charm dropped. He was about to say something that wasn't just careless. It was going to be ugly. Malik felt it coming before the words formed. That instinct black men develop long before adulthood. The instinct that warns them right before someone crosses a line so sharp it cannot be ignored. And in that split second, with a nation watching live, Clay Morrison opened his mouth. When Clay opened his mouth, the words came out smooth enough to sound professional, but poisonous enough to make every heartbeat in the room stumble. He leaned forward with that same rehearsed smile and said he was just being honest. that statistics show young black men usually struggle with discipline, consistency, and long-term planning, and that Malik's success was a rare exception no one could have predicted. The studio fell silent in a way that didn't feel like silence at all. It felt like something collapsing. Even the cameras, humming in the background, seemed to hesitate. People behind the scenes froze where they stood. The air tightened. The moment didn't just sting, it sliced across the country. Living rooms went still. Viewers leaned forward with an ache building in their chest. Some shook their heads in disbelief. Others whispered at their screens, because they knew exactly what they were witnessing. It wasn't a slip. It wasn't ignorance. This was the kind of remark that had been thrown at black men for generations, dressed up as data to make it sound smart. Clay didn't see the wound he reopened. He didn't see the weight he pressed down on, but everyone else did. For a second, Malik said nothing. He looked at Clay, not with anger, but with the restraint of a man who'd practiced calm his entire life because the world demanded he master it. Inside him was a storm that came from years of watching people who looked like him spoken over, corrected, doubted, and measured against standards built by people who never faced their struggles. He thought of the older men he grew up around, the ones who taught him how to survive, not just the streets, but the judgment that followed him into every classroom, every interview, every meeting. Don't let them shrink you. Don't let them tell your story for you. Don't let them decide how high you can dream. Their voices echoed through him now, grounding him, steadying him. Clay cleared his throat, mistaking Malik's silence for agreement. He opened his mouth again, ready to continue, maybe even double down. But Malik lifted his hand slightly, not rudely, not aggressively, just enough to signal that he was about to speak. Clay stopped mid-word. Malik took a slow breath, the kind of breath a man takes when he's carrying history in his lungs. Then he began. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't tremble. His tone was steady, but each word carried the sharpness of someone who had been waiting his entire life for a moment where truth could finally be heard. He started by addressing Clay's statistics, exposing the way numbers were often twisted to fit a narrative that made people like Clay feel comfortable. He explained how the same communities labeled as undisciplined were the ones starved of resources, denied opportunities, and pushed into corners society refused to look at. He spoke about what discipline really looked like, waking up at 4 in the morning to help his mother before school, fixing broken electronics until his fingers cramped, teaching himself what no one else had time to teach him. He told the truth Clay didn't expect to hear, that his success wasn't luck, it wasn't a miracle, it wasn't an exception, it was the result of grit, hunger, and a fight he never asked for but inherited the moment he was born. Clay tried to interrupt, leaning forward with a nervous laugh. "I didn't mean it like that," he said. Reaching for control he felt slipping away, but Malik kept speaking. He talked about how society demanded black men react like they were grateful for small chances, how every accomplishment came with the hidden instruction to stay humble, stay quiet, stay manageable. He laid bare the pressure to act less intelligent than he was so he wouldn't intimidate anyone, the pressure to downplay his victories so he wouldn't seem ungrateful, the pressure to fit into a shape others carved long before he had a voice. His words were not loud, but there was a fire in them that threatened to burn through every camera lens aimed at him. The crew stopped moving. Clay's smile faded completely. He leaned back in his chair like someone who realized the floor beneath him wasn't as solid as he thought. Malik's voice deepened, not with rage, but with truth. He spoke for every kid who'd been told they beat the odds, instead of being told they were smart, capable, and deserving. He spoke for every student who was treated like a surprise when they excelled. He spoke for every young man who didn't just dream big, but dreamed in spite of a world that expected him to settle. And then, right as Clay tried to reclaim control of the conversation, Malik delivered a line that stopped even the camera operators in their tracks, a line that froze the entire studio and made the entire country feel the shock ripple through their bones. He looked Clay dead in the eyes and said, "If you think my success is rare, then you don't understand my people. You only understand your assumptions." Before the country watched Malik stare down a man who thought he could define him, Malik lived a childhood that most people never saw and even fewer cared to understand. A childhood in a neighborhood the city rarely visited unless something went wrong, a place where the streetlights flickered like they were tired, and the sidewalks carried the stories of people fighting to stay upright in a world that kept shifting beneath them. Malik grew up in a small apartment on the 3rd floor of an old, cracked building, the kind of place where winter felt colder than it should, and summer made the walls sweat. His mother worked double shifts at a clinic miles away. She left before sunrise and came home long after the evening buses stopped running. Her shoes were always worn down, Her hands carried the weight of exhaustion, but she smiled anyway. She always smiled for him. Most nights, Malik sat by the window waiting for her. He'd listen to the sounds of the hallway, the footsteps, the arguments, the laughter, the neighbors' doors opening and closing like the rhythm of survival. When she finally walked in, she'd kiss the top of his head, whisper something soft, then fall asleep, still wearing her work clothes. Malik learned early that tired didn't mean defeated. She showed him that without ever saying a word. School wasn't a place that welcomed kids like him. Some teachers saw potential. Others saw trouble before he even spoke. They called on other students first. They skipped his raised hand. They shrugged when he tried to ask for extra help. His questions were treated like interruptions, not curiosity. Over time, Malik learned to teach himself. Not because he wanted independence, but because he didn't want to fall behind in a world that never slowed down for him. He still remembers the day the principal called him into the office. He was 12, small for his age, quiet, always watching, always thinking. The principal leaned back in his chair, looked at Malik the way Clay looked at him years later, and said, "Boys like you usually don't go far. I just hope you stay out of trouble." No advice, no guidance, just a warning wrapped in a stereotype. Malik walked home that day with his head down, but inside him something sparked. A tiny burn, the kind that doesn't flame right away, but settles deep and waits for its moment. At 13, he found his moment. It happened by accident. A neighbor dropped a broken radio outside her door next to a pile of other things she couldn't fix. Malik stopped, looked at it, and felt a strange pull. He carried it upstairs, took it apart on the floor, and studied the pieces like they were a puzzle meant only for him. The screws, the wires, the tiny circuit board, it all fascinated him. He didn't know what half of it was, but he knew it made sense in a way the world around him often did in single quotes. Hours passed. He kept working, trying every combination he could think of. When the radio crackled back to life, the sound wasn't music. It was a spark of identity. The moment he realized he wasn't just good with his hands, he understood how things worked, how to fix what others threw away, how to create something from almost nothing. That night he fixed 2 more things. A flashlight from the storage closet, a busted toy car from a neighbor's son. By the end of the week, people in the building were knocking on his door, leaving broken clocks, old remotes, and anything with batteries or wires. Malik didn't charge them much. $1 here, 50 cents there, enough to buy lunch at school, enough to feel useful. Around this time, an older man named Mr. Rayford started noticing him. He lived on the first floor, always greeted Malik, always asked what he was working on. One day he invited Malik inside and showed him a dusty box filled with old electronic parts. Broken radios, tangled wires, discarded switches. "Take what you need," he said. "Make something." Malik spent weeks tinkering with those pieces, until one day an idea clicked in his mind, a small device that could detect electrical currents and alert people when a wire was damaged or overheating. It was simple, rough, made from scraps, but it worked. When he showed it to Mr. Rayford, the old man's eyes widened. He told Malik to enter it into the district science fair. Malik hesitated. He knew what those fairs looked like. Kids from wealthy schools with clean uniforms and expensive projects that came with instruction manuals. But Mr. Rayford didn't back down. "Let them see you," he said. "Let them see what they ignore." On the day of the fair, Malik carried his project inside a shoebox. He stood in a row of pristine displays built by students who looked at him like he didn't belong there. Some whispered, some stared, some smiled politely, the kind of smile that says you've already been judged before you speak. When the judges came around, most glanced at his project, nodded, and moved on without asking a single question. His table looked out of place next to the fancy posters covered in graphs and colorful designs. Malik kept his hands behind his back so no one would see them tremble. Then one judge stopped, a black man in a gray suit. He looked at the shoebox, then at Malik, and asked him to explain how it worked. Malik did. His voice shook at first, but the judge listened, really listened. He asked follow-up questions, smiled when Malik answered, and took notes like he was witnessing something worth paying attention to, something real. At the end of the day, Malik didn't win first place. He didn't even win second. But the black judge found him after the awards were handed out. He told Malik that brilliance isn't always recognized the first time it appears. He told him to keep building, keep dreaming, keep proving people wrong. That moment didn't just inspire Malik, it anchored him. Every time someone doubted him, every time he walked into a room where no one expected him to be, every time he heard a comment wrapped in professionalism but soaked in prejudice, he remembered that judge. He remembered the spark inside the broken radio. He remembered the boy who fixed things because no one else would, and all of that sat inside Malik as he faced Clay in that studio. Every stereotype he dodged, every dismissal he survived, every hand that pushed him aside, every door that refused to open until he built his own. The studio feels different now. As Malik leans forward, every light seems to burn hotter, every shadow seems to thicken. Even the cameraman stops adjusting his lens. Caught in the gravity of what's unfolding, Clay's smirk has faded into something colder, confusion mixed with panic. The host glances at the teleprompter as if begging for a script that doesn't exist. Malik finally holds the room. He doesn't raise his voice. He doesn't posture. He simply speaks, and truth pours out of him like a force. The studio walls were never built to contain. He tells America why he built the device. Not for money, not for fame, but because entire neighborhoods, his neighborhoods, have been left to crumble. Because broken streetlights, collapsing pipes, and failing power grids somehow never get approved when the zip code is mostly black. Because genius grows everywhere, but opportunity does, in single quotes, too. That his invention isn't just technology, it's survival coded into circuits. A blueprint for communities the system pretended not to see. The crew members stop moving. The producer in the control booth forgets to cue the next segment. The host tries to reset the conversation, but his voice betrays him, thin, shaking. Then Clay jumps in for one final attempt, dripping with condescension. So what you're saying is, you think you can fix what entire cities can't? Malik turns to him slowly, and with perfect clarity, he answers, I'm not trying to fix the city, Clay, I'm fixing the parts of America you stopped looking at. The words hit like a fault line cracking across the studio floor. Clay has nothing left. Silence spreads. Electric broken only by phones buzzing in the control room as producers realize that millions of people are already clipping, sharing, dissecting every second of this moment. What was supposed to be a show has become a breakthrough. A confrontation has become a calling. And Malik has become impossible to ignore. The interview ends. But the impact does not. Within hours, Malik's words ripple across the country like a shockwave. Clips circle the internet with captions like "This is how you respond with dignity" and "A masterclass in calm power." Students replay his speech in classrooms. Communities hold discussions about the moment he stood his ground. Journalists call it a turning point, an interruption of the narrative America is used to. Malik, once underestimated, is now a symbol of brilliance wrapped in grace. Educators invite him to speak. Investors, once blind to him, suddenly see potential they can't ignore. And Clay becomes the center of a conversation he never expected. Not about Malik's invention, but about himself. And the subtle ways disrespect becomes normalized when aimed at a black man who dares to rise. The pressure mounts. Commentaries emerge. People analyze the clip frame by frame, exposing layers Clay never imagined would be visible. And then, in a surprising turn, Clay reaches out privately, not to repair his image, not to control the narrative, but to apologize. His voice is low, sincere, uncomfortable. He admits that he crossed a line, that he sees it now, that he wants to understand what he failed to see before. Malik listens. Calm as ever. He accepts the apology because healing requires honesty. But he doesn't excuse the harm. Instead, Malik does something unexpected. He tells Clay, if you really mean this, use your platform. Shine a light on the innovators you overlook. Not just my use. Clay agrees. And that moment, private, fragile reality is the true twist. Not revenge, not humiliation, but accountability turned into action. The final scene returns to Malik's old neighborhood. He stands on the cracked pavement he grew up on, surrounded by kids holding phones, watching clips of him on national TV. They look at him with the exact eyes he once carried, hopeful, hungry, waiting for proof that someone like them can break gravity. For the first time, Malik realizes he didn't just defend himself on that stage. He didn't just correct a man, or call out a system. He opened a door wide enough for others to walk through. He breathes in, feeling the warmth of the community that raised him. The narrator's final words land with weight. Respect is not something you earn by surviving hardship. Respect is something you deserve simply because you exist. Fade out, a pulse of empowerment, a lesson held in the heart, a story that won't be forgotten.